Selling brings up a lot of psychological baggage, and if you want your company to grow, you must create a sales machine that converts interested prospects into buyers. And if it's just you, then you need to be the sales engine that grows your practice. My name is Jeff Schuster with Mechanics and Mindset Business Coaching, and I cover a variety of topics that benefit small business owners and entrepreneurs. And if this is you, I'd appreciate it if you'd like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel below. So there are 8 critical mechanical components of business, and there are 7 levels of core energy, and I'm creating a series of videos called Business Mechanics and Mindset. Now you can read about these topics in more detail in my book entitled Business Mechanics and Mindset: How Your Thoughts Create or Sabotage Your Business Success. Now today's video is the 3rd of this series entitled Core Energy Selling. But before I go too far, I've also created another video that you may want to watch before you watch this one. And it's entitled, What is Core Energy? It explains the 7 levels of core energy in detail that will be mentioned throughout this entire series. The links to the book and the video are in the description below. So when I was young, I sold popcorn, calendars, and all other kinds of trinkets door to door to support band trips and all other kinds of stuff for school. And I sold these things to people who really didn't want what I was selling, and I hated it. But when I transitioned from an engineer to a salesperson, these same emotions came back up to the surface. And I was convinced that salespeople are liars, cheaters, and thieves, and I wanted no part of them. But once I was trained in professional selling and worked with a professional sales team, I learned that selling is the most beneficial skill you can have as a business professional. So I've officially been in the sales profession in one capacity or another for over 30 years. In my business coaching practice, I've discovered that there are 5 foundational components of sales or selling in any small business that you must get right. The first of these is mindset, how you characterize the profession of selling. The second is process, repeatable steps that you take to educate your prospective buyer. The third is people. Now, while I believe that anyone can sell, hiring people with solid values is a must. The fourth is sales management, and whether it's just you or a sales team of 100 salespeople, tracking numbers and holding salespeople accountable is critical to your sales success. And then finally, 5th is compensation. Proper sales commissions and base pay are different for every industry, so it's imperative that you match compensation with the desired behavior in your sales force. Now, I call these 5 components the mechanics of selling. In today's video, I'll tell you a story of 5 different car salesmen with 5 different sales mindsets. So please pay attention to which one of these are representative of your sales or selling mindset. We're going to start off with newbie Nathan. Nathan had difficulty finding a job. He was told that he could easily get a job as a car salesman. The only catch was that he wouldn't get paid until he sold something. Nathan felt that he had no other job opportunities, so he took the car salesman job. He felt uncomfortable in this new role. I mean, how could he convince someone to buy a car? Nathan watched what the successful car salespeople did, and he tried to mimic it. When it was his turn, he'd approach a customer and manage, "Hi, can I help you?" At which point he'd get a smile and a "Thanks, we're just looking." And when he got this rebuff, he knew that they wouldn't buy from him. And so he bowed out with, "Well, if you need me, you know where I am." Nathan's sales manager continued to ask Nathan how he was doing, and Nathan would frown and say, "Well, it was another tough day." At which point Nathan's sales manager would sigh and say, "Well, keep trying." Nathan could see that sales was not for him. I mean, he wasn't making any money because he hadn't sold one car, and in fact, he hadn't even given one test drive. So Nathan noticed that he wasn't like some of the successful salespeople. I mean, the other reps, they seemed flamboyant. This just wasn't who he was. I mean, after a few more dud encounters with customers, Nathan was convinced that people are either born salespeople or they're not, and he is not. So it was time to look for another job because sales just wasn't Nathan's thing. Nathan eventually found another job doing data entry for some insurance company, and while his job didn't pay much, it was much less stressful than trying to sell cars. Let's move on up to Slimy Sammy. Now, Sammy was a wheeler and a dealer most of his life. He was convinced that he would be a great car salesman. Sales is all about convincing a prospective customer to buy, and Sammy believed that he could convince anyone of anything. So Sammy believed that most people are resistant to buying, but it was his job to convince them otherwise. Sammy had a line that he would use to any prospective car buyer. He'd say, "That car's a beaut. How about a test drive?" There was no need wasting time on small talk. He wanted to sell cars and make his commission fast. Because of Sammy's direct approach, his close rate was rather low, and he didn't have any customers to call for follow-up calls. Now, he did notice that other salespeople seemed to be getting more interest on their follow-up calls. Oh well, it was only a matter of time before his direct approach paid off. Sammy was always targeting that immediate commission check. After all, if he didn't sell, he couldn't make a living, and he was convinced that if he stuck to his direct approach, he'd be rich. Sammy did get a few test drives, and he was able to close a few sales a week. Now, unfortunately, half of Sammy's customers would return to the dealership to complain about some bait-and-switch tactic that Sammy used to deceive them. So Sammy was let go after a few months when the dealership learned that they were getting a slimy reputation of cheating customers. Now let's move on up to Compliant Carl. Now Carl was new to selling cars, and he was nervous, but he was convinced that if others found success in selling cars, so could he. He paid close attention to what his sales manager taught him. He also intently watched other salespeople. Carl noticed that the more successful salespeople were laid back. They didn't hard sell their customers, but tended to engage in small talk. Carl's sales manager told him that their sales process was, first, to introduce themselves on the car lot to people looking at cars. Second, it was always good to start with some small talk about local events. The next step was to learn the type of car and budget from the car buyer. After that, Carl was to show the car shoppers some cars. The next thing was that the car shoppers would then ask for a test drive. Now eventually, Carl would ask if they wanted to buy the car. Now Carl was told that if he encountered at least 10 people each day, he would sell a car each day. Well, Carl followed everything that he had been told, but only managed to sell one car each week. Now Carl wanted to do better, but he noticed that other successful salespeople were just better at small talk than he was. They seemed to develop a relationship with their clients, while he seemed robotic in his approach to selling. As Carl did the math on his car sales, he realized that he would make $1,400 a month at his current rate of sales. So Carl gave it a few more months, but as his income continued to languish, he decided it was time to look for another profession. So let's move on up to Delightful David. David loved people, and he loved being around people. He believed that selling cars may be a great opportunity to get to know strangers that he'd never meet otherwise. David believed that he was providing a genuine benefit to his customers. His customers would get a great car that would get them to work on time and be a joy to drive on long road trips. Now, David was convinced that if he took care of his customer, sales success would follow. He intently focused on his customers' needs, and if there wasn't a car on the lot that fit his customer's budget and other requirements, he'd often send them to a competitor. Now, David was introduced to the typical sales process just like all the others. However, David spent more time in the first part of the process. He loved to get to know people and learn more about them before he spent time on the remaining steps. David's sales manager was kind of apprehensive about David referring people to competition, but his numbers showed that he was successful selling cars for their dealership. David was very successful with his customer-first approach and sold 2 cars a day. He was making great money and doing a job that he loved. So David stuck with the car dealership for a long time, and eventually he was promoted to sales manager and then developed other successful salespeople. So let's move on up to Innovative Ivan. Ivan had a lot of energy and he felt he could do well selling cars. At first, Ivan thought of selling cars as an opportunity to improve the car sales image. I mean, he knew that many people had a bad experience with car salespeople and he wanted to do things differently. Ivan followed the sales process that his manager taught him at first. He then realized, though, that certain car shoppers preferred a different type of process. For instance, women seemed more engaged in small talk, while men wanted to talk more about the features of different cars. As he adapted his observations to the sales process, he became more and more successful. So Ivan was diligent about his numbers. He knew how many people he had engaged with on a daily basis. He knew the number of test drives, the number of closed deals, and the amount of each sale. He was working with his sales manager to continually improve his numbers. Ivan's skills went way beyond sales. When a customer couldn't find a car on the lot, Ivan could quickly access upcoming auction inventories to let a customer know when they could get their desired car on the lot. Now, eventually, Ivan was helping the dealership stock the most popular and profitable car inventory. Due to Ivan's ingenuity, he was able to optimize his time to sell an average of 4 cars per day. Since Ivan was always coming up with these innovative ideas all the time, he was promoted to the business manager of the dealership. Now, many competitors would try to duplicate Ivan's success, but were always 2 steps behind. Now, as you've listened to these 5 stories, I hope that you identified with one of the 5. So let's review. Newbie Nathan is at level 1 victim with the core thought of, I lose. The victim mindset in selling is defeatist. The victim may try something and then quickly give up. The good news is that it's very rare that a victim is employed as a salesperson. Why? Well, because they can't manage to fake their confidence in a job interview. Slimy Sammy is at level 2, conflict, with the core thought of I win, you lose. Now, sadly, this is a salesperson who gives salespeople a bad name. This is also the most common type of salesperson employed. With pressure to make sales commission, the conflict mindset salesperson identifies the customer as the enemy. It's up to them to trick the buyer into buying. Compliant Carl is at level 3, acceptance, with the core thought of I win. Compliant Carl is at level 3, acceptance, with the core thought of I win. Now, Carl followed the rules and he did everything that he was told. Now, unfortunately, going through the motions will not create a trust connection with prospective customers, and without trust, there is little chance of a sale. Delightful David is at level 4, compassion, with the core thought of you win. David put the customer first, and he was glad to do so. David is the opposite of Sammy. David sees his customer as his friend, while Sammy sees the customer as an enemy. Innovated Ivan is at level 5, opportunity, with the core thought of win-win. Now, Ivan will constantly improve his performance at selling. Some of his ideas will be duds, but he'll get right back in the game and try something else until he finds something that works. So I created these fictional stories to illustrate these 5 core energy levels involved in selling. Now, at first glance, you may hear these stories and think, oh, I only want to hire Ivans. The fact is that the performance of each one of these salespeople had little to do with their ability and everything to do with their mindset. All of these salesmen had exactly the same level of experience when they started the job. The difference was the attitude or energy level each salesman chose in their new career. So how do you apply core energy to selling? You know, it's not always apparent which energy level you have with selling. So as you heard these stories, you've probably identified with all of them. But whether you're a salesperson or a sales manager, you're going to rationalize your sales performance as being affected by elements outside of your control. Now, here are some examples of lower level selling mindsets and some suggestions on how you can shift up. Let's start with the victim mindset. So victim mindset salespeople, they think and they feel like they have no control. You do have control, and here's how you shift up. So what if you're a sales manager and you're stuck with non-performing salespeople? Well, you can shift to level 2 and you can threaten firing them. You can shift up to level 3 and you can seek out strengths and use what you can with the people that you have. Or you could shift up to level 4 and you could employ some intense sales training and grow the sales skills and the disciplines of your sales team. So what if you're a salesperson and you have no confidence to have a sales conversation? So gain the confidence that you need by having maybe a relationship conversation first. And if that's too much, start with some small talk. Now, the conflict mindset salespeople, they're anxious about selling. This anxiety often results in taking shortcuts to success. So what if you're trying to sell an inferior product for a high price? You actually have the option to work for a different company or represent a different product. Don't lie to sell a bad product or service. Now, what if you're convinced that people will never buy if they know the truth? So understand that deception is not part of selling. Honesty builds trust. Trust is the foundation of successful selling. Acceptance mindset salespeople are quite obedient. They follow a process and they do what they're told. This obedience is rarely a recipe for success. So what if you follow the sales process and it doesn't work? Once you understand what you've been taught in training, make it your own. Answer the question of why the process is the way it is, and you will shift up. What if you aren't a people person? This notion that there are people and non-people people is simply a myth. Yes, extroverts are more conversational. However, introverts are better listeners. Be curious about your customer and not afraid to engage. The more you practice, the better you will be at conversation. Compassion mindset salespeople are customer-centric. However, they're not always beneficial for their employer. What if you tend to always side with your customer? I advise you to learn a lot more about your company's business. The more you learn about how your company makes money, the better you will be able to negotiate win-win deals. So here are some parting thoughts about core energy selling. The purpose of sales or of selling is to convert interested prospects into paying customers. This conversation happens through education. If your product or service is superior, an educated customer will buy it. To educate your prospect, they must trust you. Now, trust is comprised of competence and character. So know your product and act with integrity, and you will earn trust. Salespeople build trust and educate in a structured sales process. Sales processes and sales activity are overseen by a competent sales manager who holds salespeople accountable. Regardless of whether you have an entire sales force or it's just you, follow this simple philosophy of selling at level 5 win-win energy, and you'll be wildly successful at selling. I hope that you better understand how core energy works with selling in your business. Once again, my name is Jeff Schuster with Mechanics and Mindset Business Coaching. If you'd like to learn more about how I coach my business owner clients, please visit my website at www.mmbizcoach.com. And I'd appreciate it if you'd like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel below. Until we meet again, I pray that God blesses you and your business.